Hey everyone, welcome back to another Stryd coaching webinar. As always, my name is Evan, and today I am again joined by Steve Palladino. Steve, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Fantastic. Great day. Thank you.
I am so excited to talk yet again about running and training and racing with power. We just had, this is being recorded in like the second week of December. So that usually means in Sacramento, California, in the United States, the California International Marathon has just happened. That's where my PR is. It's where my second fastest marathon PR is as well. It's a great course. It's a really fun course. And you just had a few athletes run. And today we're going to dive into a little bit of their training data, their racing data, and we're going to talk about, kind of their unique considerations because you've been working with both these athletes for a while. And so I think that this type of webinar and this structure really helps not only talk about your expertise with running, training, racing with power, but also any coach watching this, any athlete that has a coach that is watching this knows working with individuals is one of those things where you just learn stuff over time. If you give a certain target and stuff like that, that some athletes will fall in a certain way. And so I'm really excited to look at two kind of individual use cases. Both of them had great performances, and there are tons of pieces of wisdom to pull out of both performances. So we'll pull up initially, we're going to talk about one of your athletes, Nicole Lane, who's an Olympic trials qualifier. The other athlete is Nick Spector, who's also an Olympic trials qualifier. So it's a pretty elite bunch. And we're going to talk about Nicole's data first. Maybe we're going to start with, you like to call it the 10,000 foot view, which I guess feels a little less high when we're here in Boulder at 5,000 feet already. But if you're at sea level in California, it feels a little bit taller and stuff too. But I would like to turn the floor over to you to go through Nicole's stuff, and then we'll just progressively talk through, sort of the training load and race day and stuff like that. So, Steve, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, let me, like you said, let me go over the training load information on Nicole, and then Evan will follow up with some questions on that. So here we go. Basically, I've got, this is WKO, and that's the analytic software I use for all my athletes. And this is a dashboard called the Training Load Dashboard Run. And any one of these charts I can expand. There's a whole load of them in the training load, pun intended. I could expand on any one of them. So that's what I just did is looking at the chronic training load. That's actually last 6 months. Let's switch that to the 90 days leading up to CIM for Nicole. And this is very similar to what you see in Power Center, where you have a 42-day average, which is essentially the chronic training load. And down here we have a TSB, which is very similar to RSB, and negative below this zero line and positive here. So essentially just looking at this at a glance, the other thing you note here is there's these little blue dots here. Those are all races. This is CIM here. This was a 5K sharpening race. This is a 10K sharpening race. This was a 25K trail race. And you notice, first of all, chronic training load, we just sort of gradually ramped over time and then sort of flattened out a little bit. And then we dropped down. It drops down when you start going into the positive on your training stress balance or running stress balance. Once you start turning positive for a period of time, your chronic load starts to drop. So this is pretty typical in appearance. But one thing to note is that for all these other races, look at how positive we got here. Actually, if I hover over that, you can see up in the legend up here what the value was. So she got to a 20 plus 20 training stress balance on CIM race day. All these other ones, look, this is a race where it was +3, this was +6, this is +4. Those are all like B race tapers. So the idea here, my idea, is we don't want to have this scenario where we're losing chronic training load this far out. So you come up for just a short breath, run the race, and then you try to get back negative TSB and a nice ramp rate. I'm going to hide this chart, look at one of these other charts here. This one that's working on it right here. This is the ramp rate. And 0 is this lower horizontal dotted line, dash line, and then 7 is like a warning signal here. And you can see that we're keeping the chronic training load progressing at a very reasonable rate. We dropped down a little bit for a couple of races, and then we're negative ramp rate going into the race. And I think that's the ideal A race taper, is when the ramp rate, that's the week over week progression in your chronic training load, the week over week. And Evan and I talked about this in another webinar, another Stryd broadcast where we talked about training load and looking at training load. Anyway, I think that the ideal A race taper is that you're negative for anywhere from 3 to 5 days in the ramp rate, and your TSB is in that 10 to 20 range, or even up to 25 for some individuals. Now, one thing that people that are really in tune with performance manager chart, chronic training load does incorporate TSS or RSS, where, and as you know, that RSS is built on relative intensity and duration. So it brings both of those variables in. But the chronic training load, even though it incorporates both relative intensity and duration, doesn't give you a fine look at the intensity distribution. And so that's one of the things I have here, a chart where you can see that where the blue line is the chronic load that was greater than 95% of CP or FTP. And then here is the load the red line is the load that's greater than, what was 103%, if I remember right. Yeah, greater than or equal to 103%. So you can see that we're ramping everything 95% and above. We're getting a gradual chronic ramp, and then we started ramping and sharpening with some of these shorter races and some faster intervals thrown in to get a little bit of sharpness at the end. And that chart helps to depict that. This chart here, it gives you the daily TSS or RSS, if you will, the daily as a percentage of the chronic training load at the time. And you'll notice here, and this is really important, it's important whether you're elite or not. All these, this horizontal dotted line, the lower one is 100% of CTL. And the next one is 125 and 150. Notice all of these runs down here that are less than 100%, those are all easy runs. They're recovery runs. They're aerobic recovery runs. So they're easy intensity, and they're generally, an hour or less or somewhere in that range. But most importantly, they're less than 100% of CTL. Very important. Then you see these other band of blue bars that are hitting right around 125%. These are all workout days. They're all interval or tempo sessions, a little bit longer duration than the easy recovery, and certainly higher intensity. So those are workout days. And then you see these other ones, and they're all long runs. And that's where you're getting up around 200% of CTL for your long runs. Now, one thing to look here, this is CIM over here on the far right. Look at that one. That one is 265% of Nicole's CTL at the time. So, and all of these long runs are they're not quite that high, but they have to be higher in terms of preparing somebody for this particular race, in terms of the amount of TSS or RSS that will be expended here. So, this is a good learning chart. And then,
could I pop in really quick?
Absolutely, yeah.
One thing that I feel like I've learned over time too is an understanding of what chronic training load is. So referring to it as CTL. Chronic, I feel like when a lot of runners hear that, they maybe think of like, oh, I have a chronic injury or something like that. So they have a negative connotation. Yeah. But the thing that really helped me, and you totally just explained it right there too, and the thing that helps me visualize it is that your chronic training load, like you mentioned, is the average training stress you've been able to do per day over the last 6 weeks or 42 days. And it's something that your body has been able to handle on an average over 6 weeks. So it's just something that you've been able to show that you can do. And using that as a reference point shows that you have a thing, that you can generate a certain amount of stress each day and handle it, but you have to go above in stress in different ways, like you explained, with those bands between 100 to 125%. So you have to do more on those hard days to push that stimulus. And then I really, really like that chart that you were just showing, comparing, CIM has 265% of your daily stress because it's an all-out marathon, but it doesn't mean that you ignore that during training. You have to be able to build your tolerance for that type of training load to be able to, run well from mile 20 to 26, or run well from 30 to 42K, be able to close out the last few miles of the marathon very well. And so I think that this chart, but then talking about it, making sure that people understand that, chronic training load isn't a bad thing. It just means it's, a reference point for your body to be able to handle a certain amount of stress, and then be able to key, workouts and intensity, and be able to read how that stress is impacting your training and how you can stay more consistent too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you stopped me there. Think of chronic training load as that load, because it's at least 6 weeks. Actually, because of exponentially weighted moving average, it's actually closer to 12 weeks. But consider it the load that the athlete has already adapted to.
Right.
In other words, that's what they're used to. So if you are disturbing homeostasis, if you're adding stress to create a stimulus that the body's going to adapt to, you want it to be more than 100% of the CTL. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, periodically, you can't do long runs every day, but you want to really hit it, like you say, so you can be prepared to run such a long race. Now, if it's a half marathon you're preparing for, you don't necessarily have to have quite as long runs. You still want to have them, and 10K a little bit less. So, for example, my general preference is for marathon, I'd like 32 kilometers, 20 miles or more in training. For Nicole, 24 was about what we were getting to. A half marathon, maybe only 18 kilometers of training. And for 10K, maybe maybe even 25. I said 18.
18 miles, 30K.
18 miles, 30,
Yeah.
30K, and 10K, maybe only 25 kilometers, 15 miles is the low.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm so happy you stopped me on that, because all of this line right here, the 100% line, everything below is allowing the body to recover, but we're still, we're 80%, 75 to 80 to even 90%. We're providing some aerobic stimulus, but it's enough to let the body to recover. Totally. Anything above that 100%, that's a positive stimulus for growing the CTL. And the CTL is what you've adapted to. So the more that grows, the more you're adapted to this combined duration volume.
For sure. One other question I have about this, and we were talking about this very briefly before we started recording, but the concept of not just looking at any one workout as a standalone thing, right? So this chart shows me too, we have these really big spikes, at or above 200% of your chronic training load, or Nicole's chronic training load. And we either have a very easy day well below 100%, followed by an off day, or an off day with 0%, no running on that specific day. So could you talk maybe really quick to that point in that buildup? There's maybe, 6 or 7 days where I see a really big spike and then very low and then off to make sure you recover. So maybe talk through the logic behind that really quick.
Yeah. Well, I've been working with Nicole since the end of 2016. She's been running with Stryd that long, and I've been working with her. And one thing that we found early on, and we have not strayed from, is she gets a 0 day every 2 weeks, and we try to work that 0 day in. So basically, we see this block of training, and here's a long run. That's a Sunday long run, and then a Monday. She usually takes her 0 day on a Monday, so that's a 0. And then another block. This is a Saturday long run, then an easy run on Sunday, then an off day on Monday. So for her, it is it's just one of the things that we just program into her training is every 2 weeks is a 0 day.
Mm-hmm.
The harder you train, the harder you need to recover. And I've always used that phrase, and it's not just recovery in terms of running load, but it's also sleep and nutrition, all these various elements that go into recovery. So yes, adhering to this, these easy days, and then for her, every 2 weeks is 0 day, is important. Now, Nick, we'll see a little bit later. Nick is much higher volume and not many 0 days. The 0 days that I gave him were after some hard races, so it's a little bit different, and it goes back to knowing the athlete, learning what the athlete thrives with, and trying to stay in that happy zone, the sweet spot of training load and recovery, because it's a balance. If you're applying load, you have to balance that with recovery, so you're not tipping into overload and injury and overtraining syndrome, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other charts on this dashboard you think would be relevant before taking a look at the race data from CIM for her marathon?
They're just briefly, but while I'm on this chart, let me just make one other point. Look at the dots down below. These are all races. So this right here is a 5K. This right here is a 10K. This is the 25K trail race. So notice that even though they're hard races, they're not adding a lot of load. So for an elite athlete with a fairly high chronic training load, they're able to absorb these race efforts a little bit easier than, say, someone had a low chronic training load. A race might tip them up into the 150% range. And that takes a little bit longer to recover from. So you have to consider this. If you're using racing in your build, you also have to think about, how am I going to recover from that race and get back into it? So for elite runners, and we'll see this with Nick as well, it's a little bit easier because they're what they've adapted to, their chronic training load allows them to fit these in without that big hit in terms of recovery time the next week. Just back to her load stuff. This is her monthly. This is 3 zones, and we can see she's very pyramidal in her training. This last December, it's an incomplete month, and it's heavily weighted by that CIM data. But you can see that she's generally around 8% in this zone 3. A lot here, mainly because when you're training for a marathon, you're doing a lot of marathon power tempo, deliberate practice, and so it loads up this middle zone here, and this is zone 1. So people talk about polarized training, and they talk about 80-20, some great concepts in there, but it varies from individual, it varies from the planned race, et cetera, what is optimal for a given athlete. So Evan, let's you want to go into the actual race now?
Yeah, and I mentioned I've run this course twice, and I think the California International Marathon is an interesting and enticing course for a lot of people. In the US, a lot of people call it a very fast course. It is true that it is a net downhill course. It has, I believe it's about 100 meters of net elevation loss, or something like 300 feet.
Yes.
You have a total, I think, of about 330 meters or 1,000 feet of loss and 700 feet of gain during it. So it is a course that I actually have, and I think this is actually a really good illustration too, because you can see all the spikes in the power data. My best race there, I was going for a specific time. It was 2017, and I was trying to hit an Olympic trials qualifier, and I ran 2:18:19. But looking at the power data the next year I ran it, where I was just trying to go PR, and I ended up running a lot slower than my PR there. I went out way too hard and didn't respect the hills on the course. And I think athletes' tolerance, like you talk about, it's all based on what you do in training and how evenly you can do stuff. But the first part of the course, all the way through mile 20, it is downhill, net downhill for sure, but there are plenty of uphills thrown in there. And so patience and pacing and sticking to your targets is an absolutely necessary thing. But I know Nicole specifically trains right around Sacramento. Is that right? And she is relatively familiar.
No, she's in Arizona now.
Okay.
So she gets a little bit different terrain, but she knows.
Sure.
She's done this before.
Sure.
But you're right. I mean, this chart here, this is her race file, and the white is actually elevation change. And as you said, it's a net downhill, but there's some uphills in here. There's, it's a rolling course. And as you said, you can be tricked into, oh, wow, this feels so easy. I'm gonna forget my target and because this is my day. I'm gonna go a little bit harder. No. Respect your target early on, and that way you carry it to the end. It's interesting. I was at the finish line on race day, and I had 6 people on my tracker, 6 different runners on my tracker, watching, you know, their split times and their projected finish time. And Nicole was, you know, she was in the 240 group, so she was just hanging. And you can see here that you know, she started getting it done right in here. You look at that power ramp right in here compared to below earlier on. So she stayed conservative. She stayed true to herself, and she was even, you know, I'm looking at, you know, 20 miles, 32K, and I'm looking at she's still on 240. I projected for her that she was going to be somewhere between 37 and 39. And I go, okay, well, I know she's got it in her. It's just a matter of she having a day where she's going to be able to ramp. And all of a sudden in these final kilometers, I'm looking at the tracker and I'm going, oh my goodness, she's dropping below 6 minute pace near the end. And you know, look here, if you look at the legend up here, I'm going to expand this or bring it up. If you look in here, she starts getting it on right here with, you know, sub 6 minute pace, or you know, if I were to switch over to metric, you know, she's getting into, you know, sub 345 pace in here, sub 340. So it was just a brilliantly executed race. And this is one thing with elite runners is they've got so much race experience. I trust their racing instincts. Plus, they're more accustomed to racing in packs, and what the pack does, they have to do. Otherwise, they're gapped. I usually allow the elite runners a lot more leeway into determining things. Nevertheless, I told Nicole, I says, look, 222 to 225 is your likely average power for this race, with a top end of 228. And I like to give Nicole more conservative targets in the beginning, because this is the type of race she really likes running. She likes getting in, getting comfortable, and then racing, really bringing in that second half. So I told her 222 to 225 is what I projected as the more conservative power estimates for this race. And with a top end of 228, she averaged 229. So there was a lot of good with this race, and she ended up with official time of 2:39:10 was her official time in this race. So that was her race. I don't know if you want to go into numbers more, or her training, some specific training efforts, etc.
Sure. You know, one initial question I have, you know, some of the past athlete data that we've looked at on past webinars, we've, you know, specifically taken a look at first half versus second half. And that's, you know, sort of an arbitrary breakdown where, you know, it's half of a marathon and then half of the second marathon. For a course like this, it is a valuable insight into how the course changes and how an athlete is prepared to handle those changes, because like we talked about, you know, the course is net downhill, but most of that comes in the first half, and the second half is more flat. And it depends if your legs are conditioned for the muscular trauma that comes from the downhill, and then the uphill that enhance, you know, metabolic response to it. It depends on your fueling as well. And so those are all factors, but maybe talk about how she handled the first half versus the second half of the marathon.
Well, I sort of spoke to that a little bit when I was showing the actual the power distribution and speed, et cetera, that prior graph. But this is a chart that I have that essentially takes the entire run and splits it into 2 equal parts, and then you have second half versus the first half percentage change. So her running effectiveness declined, and running effectiveness can decline with fatigue, but you just mentioned it. The first half of the race is a little bit more net down, and then the second half is that rolling. So I would expect the running effectiveness, again, the speed that you're getting from the power you're producing, to actually decline a little bit on this course. So this, I think, is course specific and not so much fatigue. Her power, she had a 2% positive power split. And I've analyzed a lot of files, a lot of races. PRs tend to happen in that plus or minus 2% power split. Now, in running in general, people talk about negative splitting and the advantages of negative splitting. But a negative split is typically a positive power split. Negative split refers to your speed or your time. So negative split, it refers to speed, time. Positive split is what's happening with the power, plus or minus 2%. If you negative split too much, that means you probably left some time on the course. Same thing, if you go out too hard and you have a big positive split, I'm talking about time again, time splits or speed splits. If you go out too hard and you fade too much, then you're going to have a big positive speed split and a big negative power split. You left time on the course. So the optimum that I found, many runners, many races, is plus or minus 2% power split. So you can have a runner that went out and faded a little bit, 1.9%, 1.5% negative power split. I've seen PRs with that. Same thing with plus 2%. Like here, this was a 2-minute PR for Nicole, and she did it with a plus 2%. If it was plus 3% power split for her, I would say, Nicole, we still have more time to gain. With a 2%, maybe she could eke out that 10 seconds or 11 seconds and get under 2:39. But if she was closer to 0, perfectly even. But yeah, this is an important thing. These other metrics down here I use for gauging relative fatigue. And usually ground contact time is a really good tell of fatigue, because ground contact time will go up with fatigue. Her ground contact time actually cut down in the second half of this race, which means she was booking in the second half. This ratio here, power to ground contact time, is one that I really like, because with fatigue, power declines. With fatigue, ground contact increases. And when you put them two together, it sort of magnifies the effect. So here, this is a plus 4% power to ground contact time ratio. And there was no fatigue here. I mean, yeah, her legs were fatigued, but it wasn't exhibiting in a decline in her performance. She was looking pretty good with these various metrics here.
Yeah, one thing, if I could just pop in really quick too about this. So your athletes don't typically look at a dashboard like this in WKO. Is that correct? Like, you're typically doing some of this analysis over their workouts and their races and looking at stuff like this to pass on that information. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I will, this particular view, I usually don't look at it except for races.
Sure.
I use this for just race analysis, but I will, I'll copy paste this into their final surge in the comment section, final surge. When I usually provide a very detailed race analysis in the comment section of the race and final surge, and I use, it's copy paste. But no, they're not. very few of my athletes have WKO. A few do, and they have the same charts, so they can look at it on their own, but most don't have this.
One thing, I guess, just looking at this too, if this chart and thinking about things and visualizing and breaking down, maybe first half versus second half of a marathon and how do, my metrics change and stuff. The one thing that I would probably say is probably don't get too obsessed over any one number changing, because as we look at this, we can gain an understanding of the situation and what happened. So you're mentioning, fatigue and stuff like that, but really looking at this, you can look at, the previous, power chart and get a similar thing where we say, hey, she sped up, she increased her power, her cadence, was around about the exact same. She was, spending less time on the ground per step. She just picked it up and stuff. And so looking at things like this, it's not necessarily as helpful to obsess over, did my stride length change 2.1% versus 2.2%, but how do things change and what is the puzzle, kind of shape shift like as you change the different metrics around too, is probably the one thing I'd leave people if they see a chart like this that's kind of new and shiny, is not to maybe hyper obsess over any one specific thing, but look at the whole relationship as a whole.
Exactly. And I'm going to tie this back to what we were talking about earlier on the macro. When you're looking at how one workout fit looks, you really want to see how it fits relative to what came before, what comes after, how all the global view, the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so I agree with you 100% there. Is like, yeah, this one here, the power split is the one that I really spend a lot of time on, but it's the global view. What's the pattern that's being shown here? And you can see it with this chart. You can see it here. You're looking for patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Looking what the global what these various metrics are saying about the effort in a global context.
Maybe one last thing as we look at Nicole before we move on to Nick's. One question I would have is, you said you gave her a range with a ceiling, and you mentioned that all athletes are different. Some do really, really well with really tight ranges, really, really close together, say, hey, I think you should run right about here. Other athletes who say, you got to go with the pack and you got to just have that cap and that ceiling to make sure you don't blow up and sacrifice your race. Is there any workout or long run in general you found that gave you more confidence in giving her that projection on race day? So maybe a specific session or a string of 1 or 2 sessions that just, by your eye test and, just looking at the data and being able to work with her, giving her that sort of recommendation. How did you arrive on giving her that range you gave her on race day?
Well, I mean, the range that I gave her was based on race power planning. It's the same thing as what the Stryd race planner does, but I do it, manually with the super power calculator. So I'm using her FTP or critical power. I'm looking at her running effectiveness in a bunch of long runs. I'm looking at prior race performances on this course, which is once an athlete has had a performance on a particular course, then you could really fine tune the targets and knowing what the running effectiveness was for that particular race. But let me go into, I'll generally have a wide range or a narrow range. And what do I give the athlete? Well, Nicole is one that, I know she likes to start conservatively and build. And so the targets I give her, race power targets, are on the conservative side. So they're not, she looks at it and I don't want her to freak out if I give her what I think is her max. I give her what I think is something that she can really do. Now, let's take what I just said, let's apply it to training Nicole. That's the way she likes to race. So what I've been trying to do is get Nicole to stretch her long runs out a little bit, but also what I like to do is put that marathon power tempo in and even backload it towards the back half of the long run. And she, it's been a lot of coaxing to get her to do that and get that. And she started doing it in this cycle. She had a number of them where she started doing the cut down at the end, the marathon power at the end. It supports the way she likes to race. So that's why, I try to steer her to doing what she likes to race, what she's had success racing, is do her training. In terms of intervals and such, she doesn't like doing a bunch of mile repeats. She likes to do workouts that cut down. So I had workouts where I had, 3 miles, 2 miles, 1 mile, increasing the sort of a ladder, 3 mile, 2 mile, 1 mile, increasing the intensity with each one. And, throwing in, getting the high, mixing in the high intensity stuff. I had her do 3 miles at like half marathon power, then a half mile at above 10K up to 5K effort, and then back to the 3 miles, and then back up to the half mile. So knowing how she likes to race, and this is part of learning the athlete over the last 5 years, knowing how she likes to race and knowing what she does and doesn't like in training allows me to sort of fit what I want to get to have her achieve the best race day performance. I try to meld those two, look at how she likes to race, try to get some of her long runs to reflect that, try to get some of the interval and tempo workouts to reflect that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, again, echoing the one point we've talked about a couple of times, learning how the athlete responds to the training and then responds, maybe to those prescriptions for race day and stuff is extremely important, instead of just, plugging general numbers into a general calculator and saying, hey, I think, we maybe should target right around here. Using that sort of informed decision about how, you can prescribe stuff in the training and then how it reflects in the racing is incredibly important. And it looks like this is one of those 3-2-1.
That's a 3-2-1. And there's another one I want to just pop up here just for fun. Let's go back just a little bit. This one here, this is a long run where this is one of the first times I got her to actually start doing tempo near the end. Mm-hmm. This run was in Flagstaff with Molly Seidel,
who, if people don't know, is the Olympic bronze medalist in the Tokyo Olympics from the United States.
Yeah. So this is a good experience for her where she got to run with her. And then I think they split off here because then Nicole did her little.
She said, Molly, I don't want to drop you on my tempo segment. I know you're fresh off of coming back from Tokyo, but I don't want to embarrass you too bad.
Well, I think it was it was like that. Yeah, something like that. But no, I think I was talking to Nicole about that, and she said that it was a bigger group, and Molly at least one point said, hey, we this is not my thing. We got to cut it back a little bit. Let's keep this under control. Mm-hmm. Let's not get out of ourselves here. So anyway, just a couple little blips there.
Awesome. And then I'd like to ask one final question about Nicole's race, and then we can take a look at Nick's race as well, going through a similar sort of flow. After the marathon, do you have a general process in terms of recommending, how each individual athlete takes enough time to recover and make sure that they're, ready to target a new training session? Maybe for Nicole specifically, maybe you can speak to how you debrief and decompress after the marathon, and maybe what a next goal is maybe for her training buildup.
Well, on the in terms of post marathon recovery, my default to every athlete I coach, not just the elites, every athlete, is don't run until your legs are not sore anymore. So, whether that's, 3 days, whether that's 10 days, I don't care. I don't want to risk injury. There's no sense in doing it. We just had a 265% TSS percent of CTL day. Remember, racing is a training dose as well. So no, I say zero, no running. I get massage, chill, do the stuff that you haven't been able to do in terms of other stuff in your life. Maybe once you start feeling a little bit, but you still have a little soreness, go for a little walk. Go, get on a stationary bike or a bike and go for 30-minute just spin out the legs sort of thing, or swim. All of those cross training activities, if you're really itching to go, but no running. Then I like getting into every other day running, 20, 30 minutes every other day. And if there's no setbacks with that, then we could build off of that. But I like that every other day because it allows anything that I'm missing in terms of injury avoidance and so forth. It allows that to sort of sort itself out in that day off in between. So I like every other day after that period of no running. The other thing during this time is a time to, hey, let's think about what's your next goal? What's your next target? And I know Nicole wants to try to make that 2:37 qualifying time. So we got a couple of years to sort of chip away at that, but she also really enjoys trail racing, so she'll probably do a little of that. We'll phase that in and then get in some other fun things she likes, but I'm going to want her to get back towards those long runs, start reinforcing the cut downs within the long runs, because I think the more she does that, the more she can do what we saw on race day.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And then one last thing, maybe for more context. So you mentioned a 2:37 qualifying time. The USA Track and Field announced for the next Olympic trials in the United States. There's an Olympic trials system to select the team that goes to the Olympics, but it's also a very big race for people who are maybe more in that sub-elite category, maybe like myself, like Nick, like Nicole, who are aiming to hit a certain time to qualify. And 2:37 is the qualifier for the women, and being able to run, 2:39:10, and then still have another, 2+ years to be able to go after a couple minute PR is a great sort of goal as that next step. I do think, but for a little bit more context.
Yep.
Do you have any other points about Nicole's race before we move on to?
Not about a race, but I'm just going to throw one thing in that might be useful, and it transitions us into Nick. We had dinner. Nick and Nicole and her family and we had dinner the night before CIM, and Nick, as we were driving, Nick goes, "Who follows your instructions closer, Nicole or me?" And I go, I think Nicole. But here's the deal. I'm segueing into easy runs. Nicole, since I've been working with her, when I first started working with her, she'd always run her easy runs way too hard. I mean, she was doing, 84, 85, 86% of her threshold power or critical power. And on an easy day, I'm going, no. So it's always been, hey, Nicole, let's stick around 80. And she's gotten much better. So she's usually in that 79 to 82% range for her easy days. When she starts getting to 82s, I start getting a little nervous and I start dropping her a little note. But that's been a big improvement for her. We talked about how we change the long runs, how we do the tempos and progressions, etc. But no, the easy days are as important.